But my philosophy is very simple. When you see something that is not right, not fair, not just, say something, do something, get in trouble, good trouble, necessary trouble.
Strength and solidarity. The strength and solidarity. Divided is our nation, combating and fighting hatred. The mission, should you choose to accept it, is fighting racist. Psychology is just a space where we run in our simulations. We load you up with the tools, then we plug you into the matrix. So have a seat on the couch, now tell me your situation. Take a look in the mirror, be honest, just who you facing. Marginalized as a youth, what challenges were you faced with? Feeling you wasn't equal, told that you wouldn't make it. Your ID isn't real, got you constantly trying to fake it. Hiding behind masks in the closet till you can't take it. Getting harder to breathe, someone choking you on the pavement. Unspeakable violence attacking you cause you Asian. Accomplices we accomplish through collaboration, engaging, educating, evaluating one another, liberating the future of all our sisters and brothers, empowering, elevating all communities of color. Strength and solidarity. The strength and solidarity.
The Strength and Solidarity podcast is a conversational piece that invites scholars, community activists, leaders, artists, and entrepreneurs to discuss their work as accomplices in cultivating cross-racial ethnic solidarity. Hosted and produced by Pooja Mamidanna and Dr. Donna Demanarig, our podcast team also includes our podcast interns, Alexyz Rios and Petra Zadroga. The Strength and Solidarity podcast strives to engage, educate, evaluate, and empower communities of color one episode at a time. Welcome to our season finale episode of season 1. Today our podcast guests include our podcast interns, Alexyz Rios and Petra Zadroga. They're actually going to be hosting this episode today, and we're going to be talking about our journey through creating season 1. Thank you so much for tuning in on this journey with us and for listening to our entire episodes of season 1. Let's get right into the episode. Petra and Alexyz are masterminds behind the podcast, behind the scenes. Our wonderful interns are going to be hosting this episode today. So I'm going to lead it over to you, Alexyz.
Oh, okay. But congrats on being the last episode. I feel like that's so exciting. So, oh my gosh, I'm a little nervous. So, beware of me, please. But the first question that I had for you two is, why did you create this podcast in the first place?
So I'm going to leave Pooja to answer first because this was Pooja's brainchild.
Thank you. So basically, when I started my leadership journey in psychology associations in 2016, I believe, I noticed that the Asian American Psychological Association and APA did not really have a podcast. And this was the time when I started listening to the AAMFT podcast, which is the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy. They have a podcast. And so I was really inspired by that. And I was like, why don't these other associations have a podcast? So this was always behind my head in some manner. And then school took over, jobs took over, and then when I got invited by Dr. Cokley to be part of the task force, we were trying to figure out how do we communicate his presidential theme in a larger scale. So that's when the podcast idea came up again, and I presented it to our entire task force team and the chairs and Dr. Cokley, and we also wanted to use a medium to really communicate this message in a broader way, right? Not just to psychologists, but to people outside of psychology, and also being used as a medium where we can use it as a teaching resource in classes or, things like that. But I will let Dr. Donna also share a little bit more as to her ideas and initiatives behind, what was the idea of this podcast.
So thank you for that, Pooja. That was, she articulated it very well. So for me, my interest with this podcast is it is definitely a medium that will, reach out to folks outside of that traditional academic world. And I've done podcasting before. And when Pooja brought that up, I was definitely on board with it. And wanting to, possibly co-host with her. She did a lot of, the heavy work for this, and both of you as well. So definitely without y'all, this podcast would not be possible. So thank you so much for all of your hard work. And I know that we've reached out, like, I know that in my classes, I've, have my podcast. I encourage my students to check it out. I try to, send it out to folks who are possibly interested. I still have my wish list of guests, by the way, for the podcast. And I'm really, really hoping that for the second season, we'll get those folks on board.
Yeah, that's on my to-do list. Tomorrow I have to reach out to those people. And no, I honestly, we could not have done this without both of you and your hard work and your work ethic, and really the way you both think and the questions you come up with for our guests, and just how passionate you are in what you do. Because Dr. Donna has had experience, running a podcast through her Cross Aisle podcast. And so that was really helpful in understanding okay, how do we kind of set this out in our platform, and just both of you and everything that you've done with designing the podcast, covers and our art, and just your masterminds behind it. It takes a team. We really focus on that collaborative part, and we wouldn't be here without both of you, and hence really wanted to highlight your voices here today. So I have a question for both of you, and I want to know, why did you both want to, be part of this initiative and join the podcast?
It's a great question.
It is. Petra, do you want to start it off?
Yeah, okay, I can start. I do want to mention though that thank you for all of that really nice stuff you just said about the both of us. But I especially would point to Alexyz for doing all that visual stuff and really carrying the weight of this whole thing. It's a lot of Alexyz for sure. And it's very
Y'all are
impressive.
making me blush.
It's real though. Okay, so I wanted to join the podcast because I'm not really that into podcasts, and I think that it's cool now that I'm working as a part of it. I guess this is an outcome of having joined it, but now working as a part of something like this, I'm kind of gaining a much greater appreciation for them and listening to them a lot more often and looking for them. But the thing that really brought me to it was an opportunity, and it was very much related to the things that I am interested in, which is in whatever way, shape, or form that it exists, the indigenizing of psychology, decolonizing psychology, and uplifting of non-mainstream, non-traditional voices, traditional in the APA sense, voices in psychology and insights that are maybe more representative of a broader area of humanity than you're used to when you look at psychology. And I think that a podcast is a much more accessible medium than one of those paywall journals, or even just considering the fact that so many people in the US commute and they don't really have the time necessarily to sit and read a journal that is full of jargon that doesn't really make any sense anyway. Having this very humanizing podcast where you get to talk to the experts and hear from them as people, not only as scholars, is a really, really cool project idea. So I'm glad that Dr. Donna reached out to me to allow me the chance to be a part of it, and I have been, and it's been really, really great.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because earlier when you both asked me like what was the reason behind this, also I forgot to mention, and you reminded me, Petra, it's really also honoring the work of like, our elders and capturing their voices, and also, the current generation and, future leaders, of really having this that's going to exist for a long time. So thank you for sharing that narrative part, because that's kind of the idea of wanting to use our podcast in a form of like storytelling.
Yes, Petra, thank you for sharing that, because I was honestly, the way I got introduced to the podcast was through Dr. Calvin Sims, who's co-chair with Dr. Donna. And I was taking his race in the US class, and he brought it up. And I was like, oh, that's a great idea. And so he told me to come to the general meetings, went there. I believe Pooja was there talking about the podcast. And at that time, I was like becoming obsessed with podcasts. Like I was listening to like true crime and all these other podcasts. And I was like, oh, these are great. This is a great idea. And like I'm active on TikTok. I'm not going to sit here and lie. And there's a lot of clips on TikTok of like podcast clips, and I would watch those all the time. And so I reached out to Dr. Sims again. I was like, this is such a great idea. I think it's going to reach the younger generation, which I'm all about. Like, I love the idea of bringing more young kids into the field kind of deal. And he was like, great. Well, here's Pooja's email. Here's Dr. Donna's email. You're now part of the podcast team. And I was like, oh, what? But no, now, now that I'm a part of it and we started, it's like, it's great. That's all I can describe it as. It's so great. I was so honored to be a part of it. So thank you again for letting me be a part of it. But yeah, that's how I got involved and how I wanted to stay, just because everyone was so great and so kind. I was like, okay, I'll stay.
Well, I'm really happy that you're very TikTok. You're a pro in TikTok, because Petra and I have no idea how to use that platform, and you handle the branding of our podcast on that platform, and you do a really good job with that. So thank you for all your creative work, with your art stuff and the podcast stuff, because it does take a lot of time and a lot of effort, and generally people don't get to really see what happens on the back end. And we have like bi-weekly meetings where the three of us meet and we're discussing questions for like our guests, and then Dr. Donna does her magic with the final touches and things like that. So just very, very happy that we could do this here today.
Do we have a big following in TikTok? I don't have TikTok, by the way.
Not yet. I believe we have like 4 followers, but a lot of people do go and watch it. And so there's a lot of views, which is great. So if you are listening to this, please follow on TikTok, okay? I believe it's the same handle as our Instagram. If not, you can find it on the cover of the podcast.
And the links we'll add below.
Sounds good.
Okay, so I have kind of a similar question for Pooja and for Dr. Donna, which is, what did you both want to get out of season 1 of the podcast specifically?
I'll let Dr. Donna go first.
Okay. Well, again, it's all about conversation for me, to invite psychologists of color, and to really hone in on this, the theme of cross-racial ethnic solidarity work, and to highlight, their journey, to highlight their scholarship and their contributions to psychology in general. And for me personally, because I'm selfish that way, to really get to know them, right? Because these are, superstars in our field, and just to humanize them and to get to know them outside of that that the white tower, so to speak, and to really get to know what their journey is like, to inspire the next generation of psychologists or mental health workers That's really why, I wanted to do this and to be a part of this. Strength in solidarity, I take that to heart. Working cross-racially across various marginalized groups, that is really important. It doesn't mean that I'm perfect in that. I'm human as well and make errors, but I do try my best. And I think this is one of those platforms where I get to know folks and, to see how I can be a better accomplice.
Yeah, I really don't have anything to add to that because she said it so precisely. But we tried to be as inclusive as we could with keeping in mind the number of episodes we can have in a season, because it couldn't be too much longer also. But we really wanted to also truly highlight voices from different racial ethnic backgrounds and just really highlight the work that they're doing and really talk about truthfully, what is it that we're struggling with personally in our communities and what is happening on like the larger scale. And at the end of the day, we might be all from different races, ethnicities, and cultures, but we do have that humanistic approach where we do need to work together and, to overcome all the nuances, like how Dr. Donna said, that exists in this broader white tower. How do we come together, right? So that was really the aim of trying to understand from each person what is their perspective of what that looks like on a larger scale.
I like that conquering the white tower kind of analogy. I was like, oh, okay. But we did get to meet a lot of different people from different parts of the field and all, and kind of get to hear their backgrounds and how they became part of the field and things like that, which I think was just great. But I wanted to ask you, what did y'all like about season 1? And this could be answered by Petra as well, because there's so many things that I liked, and I just want to hear what y'all have to say.
Oh boy, there's a lot that I like. I mean, just conversation wise, like that episode with Art Bloom, because I've worked with Art in another research project, and he's just like such a wonderful human being and very personable and so down to earth. So talking to Art about his journey and his scholarship work, I thought that episode was it flowed very well to me. And Dr. Reiko True, one of our earlier like leaders in AAPA. I mean, there's just so much. I don't know. There's just getting to know them and really, they're so humble and at the same time they're really badass in what they do. So that inspires me, in terms of my leadership journey.
Yeah, I think it's hard to choose like one favorite episode, because each time I do an episode, I'm like, oh, I really like that. And then when we're editing or like when I'm driving, I'll listen to the podcast and I'll be like, oh no, all the episodes are nice. So I think it's hard to say which was the favorite episode, but I think the really special moment for me was, Dr. Donna and I have Dr. Reiko True's postcards. There was like a Women Histories exhibit that was done for APA, and they were selling postcards, and Dr. Donna and I bought that. And so we actually have it. I have it right up my desk right now. It's like on my vision board. And it was Dr. True's first ever podcast ever. And so I think that was also very special in, us being able to give Dr. True that experience and us also being able to have that experience with her. So I think what I really liked about season 1 is we tried to have a variety of guests, right? So we had elders, really like known people in the field. And then we also wanted to give the platform to our younger leaders or more like emerging leaders. So I like the balance that we kind of had with the guests of our podcast for season 1.
Yeah.
Well, I was so jealous.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
It's all right.
I was so jealous that y'all got to interview Dr. True. I was like, oh my gosh. And she was so sweet. I kept rewatching that episode. She was so sweet.
Well, if
Yeah,
you're
the Dr. True episode really stood out. Like that was, she was just such a person. It was awesome.
if you're ever in the Bay Area, both of you, we could have we go have tea with her. She lives in the
Um,
Bay Area, so we can do that. But what about you, Alexyz? What did you enjoy about season one?
oh, like I said, there's a lot of it, to be honest. I stay up doing the clips and all, so I have to like rewatch multiple parts, which is great. But one thing I really like that even though they were all from different fields of psychology, it was you could find a lot of similarities in like their ultimate goal, which I really loved. And it was just like, okay, that's great that I'm not the only one kind of fighting for this goal kind of deal. But I like that we got to like hear the backgrounds of how they became into the field, like how they started into the field, because none of them were the same. They were always different, but they still had that same end goal. So I just love that so much.
Yeah, that's a really good point to bring up. Like they all had that passion and wanting to do something in the field of
Mm,
psychology, but everyone took different paths, and sometimes we don't really get to hear that when we look at their work. Like Dr. Donna said, is really understanding who they are as a person, also beyond what they do in their leadership. And what about for you, Petra? I know you're also Dr. Art Bloom's #1 fan, but what did you? I told him about that on our episode. Um, what stood out to you about season one?
I think that a lot of what everyone was saying, but like what Alexyz was bringing up about like, I mean, everybody's different and coming at it in a different way, but there's the same like end goal. And I think that that means that this strength and solidarity, like that solidarity idea really showed through well, if that is something that's so noticeable, like by listening to everybody. And for me also, like, a lot of the stuff that Pooja and Dr. Donna were both saying, both of you were saying, about like them being people, the like humanity of it. I mean, you read like a journal article and you don't like get anything about the person, the humans behind the research and the minds and experiences that drove the importance of the research are completely removed, and that is in a lot of ways problematic in psychology, as we've seen, and in research in general, this like objectivity idea, and that there isn't constant human bias, and that all psychology is in some way an indigenous psychology. It's been really, really cool to see that there are people in it and like listen to them and now understand it. Like sometimes I'll read an article and somebody comes up and I'm like, oh, that person was like on the podcast just now, it was really, really interesting. I was randomly choosing articles for my TA work and I completely forgot who it was, but it was somebody who had just been on the podcast, and I was like, wow, that's wild. And then also, for what Alexyz was saying again, how everybody had different, like was at a different point in their journey and had different journeys. I think that has so much to do with that like white tower idea, where there is a path laid out for how you get to this level academically and scholastically, but that path isn't really meant for minority voices in a lot of ways. And it's really, really interesting to see through the podcast how people worked around it or how people worked with it and ended up in the place where they wanted to be anyway, or completely accidentally. So many people told stories about how they didn't even realize they were going to end up at this point in psychology, but they did. And you have like Dr. Joe Gon came at it through the military, Art Bloom with addiction, and so many sexual and gender minority groups had talked about like starting with gender focus and then reaching this broader level. And I really think that seeing how all of that connected on the personal level in a way that you can't necessarily state academically was a huge strength of season one in the podcast. So that was really cool. But yeah, kind of went off. I have another question that
you didn't go off. And I'm just like, why? Why didn't we let you host more podcasts? I can listen to you. I can listen to you talk all day.
Thank you.
Petra has some good words, okay? I'm like, I'm listening. I feel like I'm a student again listening to a lecture. Like, oh, yes.
Yeah,
But
Petra's
you made
very
it
articulate. Like I
Mhm.
love my conversations with Petra in my office. So I miss those, Petra, by the way.
Yeah, it was so hard this semester, but they will happen.
Yeah.
But yeah. So, Pooja, you talked about it a bit. But I have another question that everyone, including Alexyz, now can answer, which is, what was your favorite episode in season 1, or favorite like moment?
I'm gonna cut y'all off because I know Pooja said that she couldn't choose a favorite episode, but I can.
Okay, thank God.
Like I really can. Like I loved all of them. Don't get me wrong. I loved every single one of them. But for me, one episode that always like I always went back to was episode 2 with the Lee brothers.
Oh,
And I just love that episode so much. Like I even posted that episode the most about it, like the most. And I was like, everyone needs to go listen to this. It's great. It's just so good. It's just so good. I love it so much. It's my all-time favorite, to
That
be
was
honest.
a very emotional, very touching episode. I agree
Yes.
with you. I feel like I wasn't even looking at our questions. I was just going with the flow, and
Yes.
it was just very spontaneous. And yeah, I'm with you, Alexyz. That episode was very
I
touching.
love that. I can go on and on about that episode. I remember watching it for clips and all. And I text Pooja and I was like, this episode is so good. Like I'm in tears. It's so good. I love it so much.
yeah. It's and not very often can we get like a family on, right? And it's actually making me think of like season 2, because I do have a mentor who's a psychologist, and her brother is an actor. So it would be really cool if we could continue. You're giving me ideas for season 2, but it yeah, you're right. We got to see those family dynamics that kind of happened in the episode, and really honestly even talk about what the distress was, and like how they overcame it, and how Mr. Martin used that in wanting to do more strength and solidarity work with their comic strip, and how both of them are collaborating with being from different fields, but uniting in this common message that they want to do.
Yes. Like I said, love the episode so much. I love the fact that, they are brothers and, they have the same parents and the same family, of course. But the way that it affected them differently in their own sense was just so like relatable. I feel like if you have siblings, it's like, okay, yes, we had the same parents, but we were taught completely different things in a sense. But yeah, I love that episode. If you haven't watched it, please go watch it.
That episode and all our episodes, but yes. Petra, do you have a favorite episode?
I honestly feel like everything I would have brought up was already said. There's Reiko True, there's Art Bloom, because star power there, and the Lee brothers. The Lee brothers one was like, their work is really, really cool. I feel like the background that they have was different from a lot of the other guests in season 1, with like what they created, and I think they already were coming from a point where it's easy to bring to light things that are not necessarily like academic in nature. And that really, really showed through in the episode. But all of them really were really, really good. It was more overall storytelling than just like question and fact and research based answer, which was great to hear. Great to hear from everyone. The Joe Gone episode was really, really good too. I don't know, they were all really, really good, but I definitely would have brought up all of the ones that were already said.
Yeah.
Don't forget Dr. Jan Estrellado's episode. I love that personally, because talking about not only racially minoritized, but also in terms of gender and sexual minority, experiences. And I was really hoping to get all three authors
I know.
for that episode, just because they're just wonderful people. But because of scheduling, we weren't able to do that. But Jan has a place in my heart for sure.
The Tarl Taylor episode was also really, really good, and I remember he was the one that came out. But it was cool because, like, there was a real call to action. I feel like listening to it, you can actually be like, "Oh, these are things I can enact," and that was pretty special about an episode.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing up the Dr. Jan episode, because I actually texted Alexyz yesterday and I was like, hey, it's Pride Month and we need to promote our episodes like more. And, something that we didn't get to do and our interns worked so hard on it was like each month we kind of wanted to promote our episodes more for like a particular month, right? Like API, like Heritage Month or like Pride Month. But hopefully we have all the work done. So next year we will continue to like advertise for that. But this is also just a plug to, go listen to our episodes during those months, because we have had guests from so many different backgrounds and ethnicities. And and, Terrell was actually my co-chair for Division 45 Student Leadership Committee. So that episode was also very, very special. And I think for me, another really special episode was the one with Dr. Helen Sue, our last episode before the finale. And I've known Dr. Helen since, I moved to this country and like 7 years ago. And Dr. Helen has seen me grow into like a trainee, into like, like a licensed therapist, and now a doctoral student. So for me, that was also just a very, very special episode, and being able to do that with her and also, highlight her current presidential theme, which really is still continuing the work of like previous presidents of Division 45 and our presidential theme for Dr. Cokley, and really understanding how do we continue to share this broader message to people outside of psychology.
What was her theme again? It had something to do with
rematriate psychology.
Rematriation. There we go.
Yeah.
Yes, I was doing the clips the other day too for her a bit, and I was just like, she just seems, the feeling that you get from her just talking, she just seems so kind. Like, something about her, I was just like, okay, I want to meet her in person too. Like all our guests, I'm like, I want to meet them. I just want to meet every single one of them before anything.
She seems so dependable. Like she seems so like fortified.
Yeah. I was just gonna say she's definitely like, like when you go around with interviews and people will ask you like, oh, who's your role model? And she's definitely like someone I say like Dr. Helen Sue is like my role model in the field, and who I get inspiration from in so many different ways of my life. But yeah, she definitely has that. As Dr. Donna said in our episode, she's a badass warrior. And yeah.
Well, before we go on to the last question, I don't think I ever asked Pooja this, but I kind of want to know how y'all got started with the task force. Actually, like, how did you meet Dr. Cokley and all that stuff? I always wondered, because like I see y'all talking, I'm like, I wonder where their backstory starts. So do you mind sharing?
Sure. You want me to start?
Yeah.
So it's really funny because I actually met Kevin in my previous podcast, Cross Aisle Talk. And Cross Aisle Talk was a project of mine when I was an LDI fellow. And he was, recommended to me to be one of my guests by the president at the time of AAPA, Dr. Rochelle Concepcion. And because they know each other, and Rochelle knows everybody. She has like people's like phone numbers. She's like, oh, I know this person. Just let them know that I sent you. I'm like, okay. So he came. He was very sweet and very accommodating, and he's this big name in psychology, and so it was a bit intimidating for me. But I don't know, for some reason, like I think it was after AAPA convention where he was one of the guest panelists, and I think that was last year or 2 years ago.
Two years ago.
2 years ago. And he actually reached out to me after that to ask me if I would like to co-chair his task force. And, that whole, what is that term now? It's escaping me. I felt like an imposter. Like the whole imposter phenomenon came up in my head where, why me? Like, what did I do? I'm nothing, I'm in the bottom rung of the ladder there. But he wanted to create this task force, and he had asked different psychologists from different EPAs, which is the Ethnic Psychological Association, and Calvin and I were co-chairing that task force. And that's how I know Kevin, and Kevin and I have had conversations after that podcast, and he's just a really wonderful, down-to-earth person. So that's how the task force came about.
Yeah, and that's a really good question, Alexyz. I'm not surprised because both of you come up with amazing questions. But so basically 2 years ago, when Dr. Donna was talking about the Asian American Psychology Association keynote, I got invited by Dr. Calvin to be one of the keynote speakers for that conference. And I was also a little intimidated during that time, same as Dr. Donna was talking. And Dr. Cokley has done a lot of podcasts on the imposter syndrome, imposter phenomenon. And I'll actually link it in our episode links below, because I think as people of color, we generally, Alexyz, you and I have had conversations about this offline too, where we always somewhat feel that way, right? With the way the society has been kind of set up. So there were a lot of big names, lots of role models I look up to at that keynote. And I was like, why are they asking me? Like, I'm the youngest on that. Like, what do I have to bring? And, all of that. And we were at the keynote, and I had said, our podcast track, the quote of John Lewis, get in good trouble, necessary trouble. And I don't know if it was that quote or another quote. I don't remember which one I said in the keynote, but this was happening on Zoom. And while I spoke, it was so nice. Dr. Cokley, it was like moving in his seat, and was like really excited. And I know my mentor, Dr. Helen, knows Dr. Cokley really well. So I took that opportunity, like while the conference was happening, to network with him. And I said, hey, I've not really gotten involved in APA leadership because just heard some horrifying things, from my elders who've been part of AAPA, and the kind of discrimination they've gone through at APA. And I've just always been afraid to kind of get my feet wet in there, and asked him if he would be willing to mentor me, and if I could work with him in any capacity in APA. So after the conference, then while he was forming his task force, then he also kind of reached out to me, and he was like, hey, Pooja, I've been thinking about you, and this would be a wonderful way to kind of get involved in APA. And the thing there are many things I respect about Dr. Cokley, but I think what I really respect about the task force is how intentional he was in choosing the people of his task force, and really making sure that there are people from different career stages, but also from different races and ethnicities, so that we are inclusive in the work that we do. And we created a framework. And even through that framework, Dr. Donna led that, and really being inclusive in the language there. And so I think that was really beautiful. He just didn't choose anyone. He was very careful with whom he wanted to be part of this task force.
And by the way, I've met Pooja even before working in this task force. So Pooja and I were, we're both part of AAPA, the Asian American Psychological Association, and we were in, the convention committee, the poster and sessions committee, which I co-chaired with Shruti, and then Pooja came in. And so, yeah, that's how we got to know each other, right, Pooja?
Yeah. Yeah, that's how Dr. Donna was my co-chair. I had to like report to Dr. Shruti and her, and that's how we started getting to know each other. And then I was so excited to hear that, you know, she and Dr. Calvin were co-chairing this not podcast, task force, because I kind of knew them through AAPA, and you know, I've had no previous experience running a podcast. I have experience doing public speaking and things like that, but Dr. Donna is like my ride or die with like stuff that happens in the field of psychology. And I've learned so much from her in this podcast. And I feel like we have a very good vibe where we like my like our strengths and weaknesses really balance each other out. And I feel like our energy, even with our guests, like when I listen to it, I love the vibe that we have.
I wouldn't call it weaknesses, by the way.
Sorry.
It's work in progress.
No, you're right. You're right. And language is so important, and it's not a weakness. You're absolutely right. And see that's again that what is it? That internalized messages that we're so used to hearing, right?
Yeah.
Yes. And I agree. Y'all work so well together. Like we watched the clips and all so many times. And it's just like, oh, they help each other carry the conversation really well, which is just so great. Pooja, you mentioned about being like scared because you were kind of younger and you're wondering like, why are all these people asking me questions? I'm the youngest one here, things like that. That is, very scary. I think one thing that I like that we ask all our guests is like, what's some advice that you give to the younger generation? Because it is very scary. Like just entering this podcast, I was so scared to do it. But Pooja was like very straightforward. She was straightforward. She's like, there's a problem, let me know. If you need anything, let me know. And it's just very comforting. So thank you for always being that way, Pooja. Also, I agree when you say like Dr. Cokley chose the task force very well. So I remember going to that general meeting for the first time, and it was such a relief that there was multiple ethnicities in that meeting. Because I've been to many meetings where it's just like I'm one of the two Hispanics in that meeting, and anytime like, oh, they mention like Latinx, they all like turn to you, and you're like, oh, okay, like this is awkward. But to be in that meeting, it was just like, I can just sit here and listen to them and be like, yeah, I agree. Like, so thank y'all for that, truly. But the last question that we have for y'all is, season 1, we have so many different people from the psychology field. And so what could we expect from season 2? Is it something similar? Is it a little bit different?
Wish list.
So we have an amazing wish list of guests, and yeah, I had some scheduling stuff where I couldn't find their email IDs and like message them on social media, and these are really famous people we're talking about, but then I somehow figured out a way to, thanks to you both also, understanding how to reach out to them. But basically for season 2, we really want to highlight people who are not from a psychology background, right? And who have different professional paths and career paths, and really want to highlighting those voices. And I think, season 1, we really focused on highlighting minority voices, and that's something we're going to do in season 2 also. But I think it would be also nice to invite people from non-minority backgrounds, but who are also doing cross-racial ethnic solidarity work, and understanding this conversation as to, hey, how are you doing strength and solidarity work? Or I'm interested in being not our whole guests, but maybe like 1 or 2 guests where we can also understand model that behavior, right? Where it's like, yeah, minorities need to work together, but even people who are not from minority backgrounds, how are we having this conversation and what are your perspectives on this? I think that's also important in cross-racial ethnic work. But I'll let Dr. Donna add more.
Yeah, thank you, Pooja, for that. And also how we can be better accomplices as well. Because, it's not just their racial ethnic identities that's also important to highlight, but other, intersectional marginalized identities as well. And so we try to be more intentional with that. Of course, there's going to be limitations with scheduling and whatnot, which I'm really hoping that we get to my wish list. I have another
don't
for you,
don't
Pooja.
don't
I won't say anything.
Yeah.
I won't say anything. But I'm crossing my fingers. And also, like for me, what is really important is how we can be better accomplices for in terms of their platform and what they're working on.
Yeah. And I know you both have given me some guests as well. And so I really hope, we've already started recording for season 2. So we had our first episode we recorded a few weeks ago, and then we have 2 more coming up. But I definitely need to reach out to the other wish list guests. Dr. Donna and I are going to take a break for the summer because we've been we've had 12 episodes, right? And there would be some weeks where we'd be recording 2 episodes in a week.
Or in a day. Or it's a lot. It's exhausting. Yeah.
And Dr. Donna also wears many hats, and I don't know how she's so on top of all her roles, just like how you both are. And that's why I love working with you all. But I think we all need a break so in July we're not recording anything. So we're gonna get back in August. But yeah. So anything else you both want to add before we kind of wrap up?
Just keeping my fingers crossed on that wish list. Okay, there were some people on there that I think would do really good on the episodes, and I'm excited just the thought of it is very exciting.
Yeah, even to our listeners, if you want us to have anyone and you know anyone and you're like, hey, I think it would be really nice to highlight their voices, you can reach us on our social media platforms. You can DM us, and we'd love to also collaborate in that way if you're thinking of anyone. So just putting that plug out there to our listeners too. But thank you so much for both of you doing this. I think after doing this, I'm going to make it a ritual that once we wrap up season 2, we will do the same for season 2 and 3. But this was a lot of fun. So thank you.
Yes,
thank you,
you,
everybody here it's been a huge privilege working on this and with everybody, with all of you and with the guests and with everybody who's listening. And it's been really, really cool, very rewarding. And it's nice to do all of this stuff that doesn't really seems so abstract in the moment. And then you hear the podcast, you can go on Spotify and just look it up and you're like, oh, that was us. That happened.
I was part of creating that. Yeah. You both are the masterminds behind it. And
especially I'm sorry, especially when we hear our voices or the questions that we write down being asked, you're like, oh, I did that. I that was me.
But
no, thank you.
No, thank you. And it takes a team, right? And we can't do this without your support. I would not be able, we both would not be able to do this without your support. And Dr. Donna and Dr. Calvin really gave me the best of their students to be like, hey, I got you. And one thing that I really love about our podcast team is there's so much we learn from each other. You both are like, oh, thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for this privilege. No, I want to say the same back to you because you both have taught me so much just in the way you think about things, in the way you carry yourselves. And I've learned so much from you. And, I keep telling y'all that this friendship yes, we do have a working relationship, but you both are someone that are always going to be a part of my life.
That's
Aw.
beautifully said, Pooja. That's
Yeah.
beautifully said.
So on that note, thank you for everyone listening to us and, tuning in on our 13 episodes that we've had for season 1. That's a wrap. And, we continue to ask our listeners to just continue to share our message, to like, subscribe, rate our episodes, and please also write reviews if, our podcast is something that's standing out to you and it resonates with you. So thank you so much for following us on our journey.
Yes, thank you, and make necessary good trouble.
Always, and we shall see you on the other side in season 2 very soon. Thank you for tuning in to our podcast today. We hope you enjoyed the episode. For more information about today's guests and their social media links, you can click on the description links of the episode. Pooja Mamidanna and Dr. Donna Demanarig host this podcast. Our podcast team includes our podcast interns, Alexyz Rios from the University of North Texas in Denton, Texas, and Petra Zadroga from Wheaton College in Norton, Massachusetts. We also want to acknowledge our production team, David DeVito and Rachel Sheffer.
If you would like to know more about us or to watch video clips of this interview, then follow us on Instagram at APADiv45_Presidential Task Force, on Twitter at APADiv45_Cokley, or on YouTube and Facebook at Dr. Kevin Cokley, APA Division 45 Presidential Task Force.
Strength and solidarity. The strength and solidarity.